Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Near Memo. This is episode 226. You've got Greg and Mike today. Next week, we'll have Anna Martinez from Uberall in a special two-part episode. And today, we're going to be talking about suspensions, and they're continuing to trend upward. And why might that be? We're also going to be talking about an interview that Liz Reid, the head of Google Search, gave recently, and where she talks about the future of search and a lot of different things like AI overviews and monetization and AI mode. And then we're going to be talking about reviews and the future of reviews. There are a lot of problems right now with reviews and the way that people interact with them. Is there anything that could substitute for reviews going forward? Are there trust signals that people could use as alternatives? So, Mike, why don't you lead us off with the suspensions issue?
Sure. So there was an article at Search Engine Roundtable by Barry Schwartz day before yesterday. He followed up on a thread from the local search forum that indicated that a number of people in the local search forum had seen an increase in suspensions, which, as you know, I track suspensions reports in the forums, which is in correlation to actual suspensions, but I track it So what you're seeing is a chart from March 2024 through September 26. And you can see that it had dropped during 2024, beginning of 2025, started to increase, hit a fairly high level in March as Google rolled out their new one and done suspension policy where you get one appeal and then you're forced into the forum. So it's not clear in March whether these increase that we saw on the forum was due to a change in process where people were less successful or whether it's due to an increase in suspensions. It's probably both. The red line that we're showing on the chart is mentions as a proportion of total posts during that same time frame. And what we see is that from March on, sort of relatively flat level, and then in August and September, another uptick in suspensions, which I think what anecdotally we're seeing from local search forum is likely Google is rolling through some category in some country, marketing in the United States. And so people that frequent the forum, local search forum, are seeing an increase in suspensions. The level of suspensions is currently very high. Google seems to be going through and verifying literally every suspect service area business and many other businesses and seems to be more serious about preventing fake business listings. Although what ends up happening in the world of probabilistic moderation driven by AI, fairly high percentage of legitimate businesses get caught up in the net, and Google's processes are both arcane and complicated. So what ends up happening, you file the appeal, you fail, and then it's not always clear, but you have to go to the forum, and product experts of Silver and higher can assist you getting one more appeal in, and they can help guide you on which documents you're missing. It's also something I do as a sideline, sort of as a hobby. I help businesses get reinstated, and it basically comes down to a lack of formal documentation and process that the businesses don't understand, that the AI that's checking the video that they're uploading has to see certain things. If it doesn't see certain things, they fail. So it strikes me that we're living in a probabilistic postmodern world isn't post-truth, it's probabilistic. And in probabilistic outcomes, 25% of the answers are errors. Google is as bad as anybody at this, and it creates a lot of frustration. The problem here is that these businesses that are legitimate deserve to have a listing on Google. And just because they triggered some probabilistic evaluation that may or may not be true, they're being punished. So it's very strange to me. But so anyways, it's not that suspensions are higher right now. They've been high. They're going to stay high. They're probably just sort of cycling through various categories and countries. And they're behind. So if you get suspended, if you don't know what you're doing, hire a professional. But otherwise, it could be a grind.
So Google just launched a new small business hub of sorts where Um, it's essentially self-promotional. It's got anecdotal success stories and website advice, marketing advice in general, and it's promoting Google AI. It's promoting Google Ads to some degree, but there's no mention that I can see of Google guidelines or policies and what to know, what to avoid. And let me check one more thing. No, it's all about marketing essentially. It's not about how you can avoid these kinds of problems. Claudia Tomina the other day was talking about how one of her clients lost two-thirds of its reviews or more because somehow Google determined that these folks were asking for reviews at the point of
It's not
sale.
so much that, right. The volume was so high. They had just opened. They were asking for reviews at point of sale. And the volume was so high, it triggered this sort
It was
of
suspect.
suspect, right? Well, it triggered the algorithm and they lost an amazing amount. I mean, Google uses a sort of Bayesian averages. In other words, when a new
Yeah.
business opens, here's how many you
It should
should
be. It's
have.
right. If it's an outlier, it gets scrutiny. Yeah.
And so the algorithm scrutinized it and removed them.
But the point I'm trying to make, is that, you know, I'm making the assumption that this business is not an unethical business, that they are doing what they think is efficacious for getting reviews, which is, of course, at the time that somebody is in the restaurant, why not ask for a review? And at least in theory, the idea is that the reviewer is being pressured somehow, or there's something unethical or untoward about this process. And more likely than not, it's just a question of ignorance of Google's guidelines. So, this is a maybe it's intentionally so, a blind spot, or Google has devoted insufficient attention to really educating people about, here's how you do this thing the correct way. Here's what our guidelines recommend. Periodically they'll communicate about it, but for the most part there's no easy way for people to get an unambiguous understanding of what Google expects.
Right. And to some extent, it's sort of like Steve Jobs' rule about apps being inappropriate. He said, you know it when you see it. Google wants ambiguity in the rules so that they can allow or disallow and not be accused of violating their own rules. That ambiguity serves them so that they can reinstate upon proof, evidence provided contrary to what they thought, and vice versa. So they like the rules being vague. They also contend, and I don't agree with this, they contend that their lack of transparency in these matters limits the ability of spammers to circumvent the system. So if Google said, oh, if you're a new business, you can only get this many reviews in this amount of time, then spammers would get n minus one number of reviews during that span of time. I suppose there's some truth in that. So
Well,
they
but
can,
that's not what they would communicate. I mean, they would communicate, this is an inappropriate way to solicit reviews. Here are the right ways, here are the wrong ways.
well, there is a vague statement in one of their guidelines that you shouldn't be pressuring consumers at the point of sale.
But that's
But that's a
totally
human assessment, and algorithms are not human.
well.
So the algorithm uses a volume over time as a proxy, and thus this business stepped into it and got their hands slapped.
The operative word is pressuring, right? If Google doesn't want people to solicit reviews at the point of sale, they should say no solicitation of reviews at the point of sale, not inject ambiguity through the use of the word pressuring. When a law is written to allow too much human discretion in its application, that's an opportunity for abuse. And courts have historically said this allows for too much discretion or too much interpretation by the enforcer, and the rules need to be clear. Otherwise, we're going to void the law. Forget what the magic language is these days, but you know,
I would love to void a few Google laws. Unfortunately,
yeah.
because they're a private corporation, I'm not given that opportunity nor privilege. So you have to live with the crazy ambiguity of suspensions and review losses. I mean, I think small businesses haven't really grokked how you live with reviews, right? I mean, there's a certain attitude you have to take to this, to being thrown against your desires into a probabilistic system and rolled around like a ball comes out in bingo or something. I mean, that's really what's happening here. The probability that your ball pops out increases. You have no clue what's going on. I mean, people don't like living in Google's probabilistic reality, but very rarely has the government ever stepped in and said probabilistic realities need to be contained or constrained because they do damage to the fabric of our society, which I believe is absolutely true. But it's like businesses didn't sign up for this, but they're going to get it whether they want it or not.
Well, I mean, one of the problems is the we're going to talk about reviews in a little bit, but one of the problems is the emphasis, and we've gone from suspensions to talking about reviews, but one of the problems is the emphasis that's placed on reviews as a means to an end, right? I mean, as you've advocated, as I've advocated, and others have advocated, the value of reviews is to really understand how your business is doing, to learn from your customers, and so on and so forth. That's the idealistic version. The way people really look at it is this is a mechanism for me to rank in the map pack or in results.
I don't think it's idealistic to strive for ongoing business improvement. To me, that is very pragmatic.
Oh,
So I would disagree
I
with your
agree.
idealism tag
Well,
on that particular value. It just is a
I
long-term view of the value rather than a
yes.
very short-term.
Well, but it's an attitudinal.
Yes,
It's an attitudinal position where you are valuing your customers' feedback and you are trying to make the business better, and that's a mechanism for that. But the way that people look at reviews, especially small businesses, because of the incentives that Google has created, and the use of SEOs as a layer in between Google and small businesses, uh, is as a means to ranking, as a means to clicks, and we see a lot of abuses of that because the incentives are so much at stake, right? We talked about that in our legal research. The median review level is so high that it almost can't be ethically achieved, and if you're not in that top tier, if you're not within striking distance,
which is
you're going to be
4.8 to
disqualified.
4.9 is really the
Yeah,
top
and
tier.
not just that, but the volume, right? It's not just getting. You have to not just have a handful of really good reviews. You have to have hundreds and hundreds of these really good reviews. Otherwise, you're going to be disqualified because people are not critical in their thinking about this.
And this SEO view, this sort of short-term mechanistic view of reviews, is only a partial view of how Google handles reviews. For example, if you get enough reviews at Yelp to get on the top 10 list at Yelp, so you need enough of high enough grade to get on the top 10 in your category, in your market. Google uses that, and the reason they use it is because your Yelp page gets further advanced in the SERPs, and so that adds value and adds ranking. So there is ranking value to third-party reviews in the Google world. It's just much more nuanced than more Google reviews and higher Google reviews, right? But I think we ought to use this as an opportunity to just transition into our review conversation instead of.
Yes, I was going to say that myself. All right, so let me frame it. On this point of like review inflation, there's enormous review inflation. Everybody's trying to get as many reviews as they can all the time, in ethical or sort of quasi-ethical ways. Then there are people who are committing outright fraud. Review fraud is still pretty pervasive. We don't know precisely what the numbers are. That's a Curtis Boyd conversation, but it's a millions and
And then
millions
there
of
are
reviews.
algorithms which, there are algorithms which either accentuate this trend or minimize this trend. In other words, the trend doesn't exist outside of the algorithm that the specific review company is using. For example, Yelp, their review algorithm punishes first-time positive reviewers, but doesn't punish first-time negative reviewers.
Right, because they think they're inherently more trustworthy.
No, it's because they want to spread it out over more of a bell curve with a lower point on the bell. So the average at Yelp is going to be 3.9 or 4 or 4.1, whereas at Google, the average is going to be 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, it's two to three
So
or
it's an
4 points higher.
algorithmic decision. And in the case you talked about of businesses' reviews being limited because they had so many of them, that's trends to reduce the overall volume somewhat, perhaps the overall average, but Google has not applied that algorithm as rigorously. So just saying that not only are users driven to get more reviews at a higher score, businesses, I'm saying that the companies that moderate these algorithmically are driven to allow Google, particularly allow more reviews and leave more of them standing. Google could very easily solve this problem by just arbitrarily cutting an inordinate number of ranking reviews. They are entitled under the law to do so.
Well, I think that they were zapping 5-star reviews for a while, it seemed like. I don't know if that's still going on, but that was what they were attacking.
No.
But
But the question
let's
is, given this inflation, given this lack of insertion by
there are
Google,
myriad problems with reviews, right? There
What
are myriad problems. Is there anything? Go ahead.
will consumers lose trust in reviews is the biggest question from my point of view, because in our research, people still trust reviews.
Well, there was some data that, in fact, you wrote about either last year or the year before about bright local consumer review data over a period of years where it did seem to be the case that review trust was declining, and there were other trends where people were looking at multiple sites as a kind of hedge against any kind of fraud on Google. And that seems to be not present in our user research. Studies in different categories, reviews are the number one or number two kind of consideration factor in
Ratings and volume, the score and the volume, not necessarily the content of the reviews, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Roughly speaking, 2/3 of the audience does not read the text of reviews. They're looking at star ratings and volume, but they are relying nonetheless on reviews and ratings and volumes to make their determinations. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of skepticism. Hey, how is it that so many of these people have 5-star ratings?
There is some, but not a lot. And so the question you were asking, which is, is there a mechanism to engender trust between a buyer and a seller that don't know each other that is as elegant and universal as a 5-star rating? And the answer to that is, at this point, I don't think there is. To some extent, like Amazon, what they're doing, which I think is very helpful, is saying this product is returned more than average.
That's like a bounce, like a
right. Yes, like a website analysis.
That's the real world equivalent of a bounce rate.
Of a bounce. And it's an effective metric in e-commerce, but only Google or Amazon as a e-commerce platform can do it. I don't think a single product, single brand e-commerce company would do it. This particular product A, facial cream, is returned more than facial cream B, right?
In the early days of review sites, back when Yelp was one among many and Google didn't have its own reviews, Judy's Book and Insider Pages, and there were a whole bunch of these sites. It was hard to get reviews. People were offering all kinds of incentives. People were giving people gas cards, and there were all kinds of monetary incentives to increase review volume. And there were a couple of sites, I don't recall their names because now it's been 20 years, maybe. Yeah, roughly, where people were trying to cobble together a score based on a lot of different signals that would substitute for a review. So they were creating numerical scores that would included, I mean, I don't even know what these signals were, business license and ratings. And I mean, they were just different, Dun and Bradstreet, whatever they were. There were multiple criteria that people were trying to cobble together. They weren't entirely transparent because you could click a link and sort of see, we create this score out of blah, blah, blah. It's like a weighted algorithm. And that never really took off because reviews were more transparent and more relatable and accessible to people. But I'm wondering, we could probably come up with a list of things that would be a substitute for a review. There's two levels, right? There's merchant and product. But there are things that we could probably do that would create an alternative to reviews. The question is, would people care? Would they use that?
Well, one point I would make is that from the small business point of view, testimonials have been a part of commerce forever. We used to have a flipboard where we would have prominent customers' quotes, and we would show that to potential customers. This goes back, obviously, very many years. So the small businesses have always used testimonials as social proof and to increase credibility. I don't think small businesses will ever stop that project. And one of the things that they may use instead of, say, Google reviews might be things like video interviews, right? Now, again, they're selective, and people understand that they're selective and that they're testimonials, not necessarily reviews. But I think small businesses will continue to look for ways to increase their credibility with clients. Reviews are quick, easy shortcut to do that. Some form of reviews will exist forever in a capitalist society. The question is, will Google's view of them as a universal symbol of quality be degraded in the short term or the medium term to the point where people trust them so little that Google stops showing them? Now, the
Well,
other thing Google is doing is that they are writing AI summaries of the reviews, which might be one way to handle it. But they're still emphasizing, because they're such useful mnemonics, they're still emphasizing star ratings 4.9 and volume
this
2,354.
you raise an interesting point, because these review summaries will succeed, as in take over, supplant reviews at some point, because as we already see, people don't read the review text. I mean, a minority of people do, but the majority of the audience does not. And I've talked about Rufus, for example, which is an AI assistant on Amazon. I'll for an editorial recommendation for a product somewhere else, like the Wirecutter or somewhere. Then I go to Amazon sometimes to buy. And when I hit the product page, there's the little AI assistant there. And I generally say, what complaints do people have about this product? What problems do people have about this product? And it will summarize them. And I use that instead of looking at the reviews. I don't trust Amazon reviews at all. I don't read the Amazon reviews. I don't look at the star ratings. And so I use a third party editorial POV to get a recommendation. And then I use Amazon as purely a transactional platform. And I sort of do some additional diligence using the AI review summary. Google is doing that. Presumably Yelp will do that at some point. And so if this AI layer, summary layer which is not a new idea, but AI is making it feasible to do this. If that happens, and people are just looking at an abstraction of a review corpus, does that decrease trust? Does it create a shield for more fraud? Does fraud get worse because it's concealed behind this AI summary? What occurs there? Because I think that's going to be more common.
I don't know. I did this process you just suggested, went to Wirecutter, went to several other sites looking for a small carry-on luggage, and went to Amazon based on their recommendations. And when I dug into the negative reviews, frequent zipper breaking, frequent, returns, the lock didn't work, and it's like, my God, 8% of these reviews are this kind of deal killer from my point of view. It's like I was
It
left.
creates paralysis.
It was total paralysis. I ended up trying to figure out some way to figure out which luggage had the least complaints. And then I ordered two to get a comparison because I just wanted to see what they felt like. And Amazon sent one of them wrong. And I returned it, but the one they're replacing it isn't coming till after I've left. So my whole plan fell apart. So I would suggest that the whole system is largely broken. I would like to be able to walk into a store, rely on the curation of the owner to pick a freaking bag and stand behind it when it breaks. Now, contrast that to my experience with OXO cooking goods. I bought a mandolin, which didn't have a sharp enough blade. They said, not a problem, just right on the bottom, do not warranty with marker, and we'll send you a new one. I did. That one came in and the blade slips out. So I wrote them back and said, gee, the blade doesn't stick in, so it's going to fall on my butt. They said, not a problem, right? Do not warranty, and we'll send you another one. And it just happened. Now, still, the product isn't quite as good as I would hope, but at least the service is excellent and the return process is painless. I don't have to return it. But I'm producing a pile now of non-functional mandolins. I don't know how you resolve this other than some sort of back to the past, small business curated products with knowledgeable people helping you navigate the complexity of modern consumption. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there are, my statement about the sort of early attempts to create a scoring system um, as an alternative to consumer reviews. I mean, just to take the legal example, and then we should sort of move on to I'm looking
Liz Reid,
for.
or we could just end it after reviews. We've
No,
talked
no.
too long.
Let's move on. Let's move on to
Our
Liz
poor listeners.
Reid. Yeah.
Hang on for another
Okay.
hour.
Okay. So in our legal research, we identified a bunch of criteria that people might use to hire an attorney. Things like the reputation of the firm, experience with similar cases, past awards, proximity to location, awards and recognition, law school that the lawyer attended, and other variables. I mean, there was a whole long list of them. And presumably these kinds of things, some of these are subjective, some of these are less subjective, but presumably you could establish similar criteria. I don't know what they would be off the top of my head, by vertical, that would indicate the integrity and performance of a particular business. And those could be used to create a relative score, which could not be gamed because they would be based on data that was collected from various third-party sources. Google's not going to do that because there's too much effort involved. But, their Google Screened and Google Guaranteed had some of the seeds of that. And that would be a way to either complement or substitute for user reviews. User reviews could be one component of that larger score. I don't foresee that happening, but it is possible and it could be done hypothetically. Nobody's going to invest the time and energy to do it, unfortunately. So,
And the difficulty is it has to scale. Consumers have to adopt it. It has to be easy to implement for both the buyer and the seller. It's like,
yep.
How do you create trust in an untrustworthy environment of the internet?
Well, it doesn't have to be easy for the seller to implement. The seller would presumably do nothing. This would be information captured from various third-party sources that couldn't be gamed easily. But it's sort of
the transparency company is attempting to do this with their badge and their additional AI evaluation of your reviews at a more critical level than Google's AI. But it's very difficult to move it beyond just a badge into a broader consumer adoption.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk about Liz Reid. Liz Reid is the head of search at Google. She is kind of
previously the head of Maps, just as a side note.
Right, exactly. She was the sort of queen of local for a while, and she was interviewed on a India-based podcast from the Economic Times called The Corner Office Conversation, I believe is the formal title of the podcast. I'll provide a link to in the show notes. And the interview is like about a half an hour, and she talks about a whole bunch of stuff. And there's nothing really all that new that she says. She doesn't reveal anything that hasn't been said or discussed before in some other context. But it's interesting. It's still interesting. Just real quickly, I'll summarize. Yeah, I can't do a summary of the whole thing, but I'll give some highlights. She talks about AI mode and AI overviews in the relationship. She talks about traditional search and template links. She says the AI mode has 100 million monthly active users in the United States and India. She says AI overviews and AI mode are complementary sides of the search experience. I mean, this may not be accurate, but she doesn't talk about AI mode as being the future of search or a replacement for AI overviews or replacement for traditional search. She says they serve different purposes. AI overviews give people factual information and sort of quick information, and AI mode is for deeper dives and more elaborate explanation and follow-ups, and that they serve these different purposes. She says that, and this is something Google has said multiple times before, queries are now getting much longer and people are providing more context and more what she calls constraints, sort of qualifiers. I need a kid-friendly restaurant for a 4-year-old, and can I bring my dog, whatever. But she says that she believes that 10 blue links are still happening and will happen, and that they serve a valuable purpose. They are the gateway to human generated content, from not the only one, but video and other things are also providing that. But this serves a very valuable and important function, human voices, and Google will always showcase them because this is what their users want. But AI overviews provide this quick information, and you can go over to AI mode and get deeper information. Interestingly, she sort of indirectly talked about the impact of AI overviews on ads. Typically, what you see is ads above AI overviews, but not always. AI overviews are often at the top of the page and ads follow lower down on the page. And she doesn't say this explicitly, but she implied that AI overviews may in some cases have an adverse impact on monetization, although they're going to be stuffing ads into AI overviews, but that the volume of search queries has grown, that people are asking more questions and that Google has higher volume, which seems to be validated by the clickstream data that Rand Fishkin and others talk about. And so that
Although some of those increases in searches we know is Google manipulating search results and zero-click searches to increase the number in a somewhat arbitrary way. So it's not completely users are
it's not
searching more. It's
organic.
Google. It's not all organic anyways. We don't know the percentage of one
Yeah,
versus
very,
the other.
very, very clearly, Google has loaded up the pages with ads, more and more ad load, and more tricks and ways to generate more queries to
And
juice
ways
that
to get
number.
more ad clicks. I mean, we're seeing in the
Right.
case of local
Dark,
and
dark,
LSAs,
dark.
there are dark patterns at play. And if they're not intentional, I would be
Well, it's
surprised.
all intentional. Just as a quick digression, Google has diluted the distinction between ads and organic content over time. It used to be the case that there were colored backgrounds delineating ads very, very clearly from organic. And the labels, it's tested different labels. It's gotten rid of the colored background. The way it positions the labels often creates ambiguity about what's organic and what's an ad. And so there's intentional behavior here, obviously, which probably runs afoul of the FTC rules against consumer deception. But we probably aren't going to see that enforcement. But just real quickly to summarize a little bit more what she says, Google's monetization is fine because there are more search queries and they're getting clicks that way, even if AI overviews are diminishing them in any given situation.
Although from my point of view, they are managing to increase ad clicks through these dark patterns that you mentioned. So again, some of that health is the health of the ad clicks for them, and the volume is being driven by their less than obvious shenanigans, which it depends on how big of a house of cards that's built on, whether that will ever end regulation, I suppose.
So she talks about the current state of Google being at the beginning of a sort of an ongoing innovation process, which will integrate AI in more ways. It's a feature. It's always been in the background, but now it's a feature of search. And she doesn't explicitly describe what that will be. She seems to suggest, this is my sort of interpretation, that the primary purpose of Google's traditional search now is navigation. It's a quick way to look up information, which is going to be answered by AI overviews. A deeper dive will be covered by AI mode, presumably. And the primary value of what we've all thought of as Google search in the past is really to get from, a query to a particular website that you're interested in, and that the sort of informational queries and the research is going to be handled by these AI tools going forward. Again, this is a little bit of an interpretation on my part, but that's what she seems to say. Let me see if there's anything I want to add to that. This is already a lengthy summary.
I would just say that from my point of view, the AI overviews and the AI mode have improved dramatically in the last year, 6 months, and they've become much more useful. They're fast. They're much faster than ChatGPT for many queries. It's amazing to me, despite their obvious and early stumbles in the AI search world, they've made a great comeback.
Well, they're one of the wealthiest companies in the world, and they saw this as an existential threat to their existence. And so they have devoted all their energy and resources to clawing back whatever usage they might have ceded to ChatGPT. And that enormous devotion of time and resources, energy to kind of recreating the ChatGPT experience on Google, plus Google's monopolies and its just sheer reach and distribution puts Google in a very, very strong position, and they may well not only survive but marginalize ChatGPT if ChatGPT isn't careful, because Google.
Well, they have the cash on top of that. They have the cash flow to sustain these expenditures where ChatGPT needs to continue to fundraise to do it because they have no money. So it's a
Well,
strange
they have
race.
money. The ChatGPT has money for subscriptions and API subscriptions, so consumer direct payments and API subscriptions, and they just introduced checkout, which they hope is going to deliver merchant fees as another revenue stream, which is a different conversation that we can have at a future point about what handicapping that. There's a very grand vision behind it, but it may not succeed for various reasons, but we'll see about that. So anything else you want to say about Google AI at this time before we sign off?
We live in exciting times, and I'm having fun. I pity the poor small business caught in the moths and the consumer caught in the moths, but it's fun to watch. Hard to listen to, but fun to watch.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening. Join us next week when we have Anna Martinez from Uberall in a special 2-part episode where she talks about AI and the future of search and AI in the organization and what they've done to integrate it in operationally and in terms of customer-facing tools, meaning their brands and clients, and then how she looks at the future of AI in the search world. So it's a very interesting discussion and 2-part episode that'll be coming up next week and the following week. So thanks again for listening. Tell your friends and keep coming back for more.